Hi, welcome back to FM8 Explained. Once you've installed FM8 on your computer and activated it using the Native Instruments Service Center, you can launch it in standalone mode either from the Start menu if you're using Windows, or from your Applications folder if you're using a Mac. So Mac users, if you hit Go up the top, Applications, find the folder called Native Instruments, FM8, and double-click to launch the application. Now, when you launch FM8 for the first time, it'll automatically come up with the Audio and MIDI Settings panel. To call that up again, you just go File, Audio and MIDI Settings. For driver, you're going to want to select Core Audio if you're using a Mac, or ASIO if you're using a PC. For device, you want to select whatever audio interface it is you're using. So, in my case, I'm using an Audio 4 DJ. If you don't have a USB or FireWire audio interface, then you'll want to select built-in output. Sample rate you'll want to leave at 44,100 Hz, and where you can afford to set the latency very much depends on the processing power of your computer. Ideally, you want the latency as low as possible, but the lower the latency, the more strain that puts on your computer's processor. So if you're hearing audible distortion or artifacting, then the most likely reason is that you've got the latency set a little bit too low and you need to back that off a bit. If you've selected the right audio interface, then routing should take care of itself, but just make sure that Out1L and Out1R are connected to the left and right outputs of your audio interface. If you click MIDI, you'll see a list of all the MIDI devices that are connected to your computer, and you just want to make sure that any keyboards or controllers that you want to use for FM8, their status is set to on. Okay. Now I'm just going to give you a quick tour of the synth. We're going to look at all the different pages and I'll tell you in general terms what everything is for. So this panel up the top here is always visible. You've got the option with these buttons on the left to hide the synth and the keyboard. So you can hide and reveal those. This File button brings up exactly the same menu as File up here. So you can load sounds or save sounds. There's a couple of other file formats you can import. We're going to talk about that a bit more in the next video. And as we've just seen, that's where you can access the audio and MIDI settings. This box here always tells you the name of the patch you're using. You can use these up and down buttons to cycle between patches in whatever bank you have selected in the browser. You'll notice that at the moment it says standalone recall. That's because when you quit FM8 in standalone mode and launch it again, it'll retain whatever changes you'd made. So if I change some things in the FM matrix here, don't worry about what I'm doing, it doesn't really matter, I'm just doing this randomly. But if I now quit FM8 and launch it again, you'll see that it's retained those settings. If you want to initialize it again, you just go File, New Sound. This ARP button over here turns the arpeggiator on and off. This little square here is basically a mini version of the XY morph pad in the Easy Morph section. We're going to discuss the morph pad in great detail in a future video. To the right of that, it tells you whatever polyphony settings you've got on, and also what percentage of your computer's CPU FM8 is using. Over here on the right hand side we've got the panic button. If something goes wrong, if you've got hanging MIDI notes or something like that, if you just hit the panic button, that will stop all audio, even reverb and delay tails. Underneath that you've got the MIDI learn button. This is really handy. If you hit the MIDI learn button and then click any parameter, like for example our filter cutoff, you can just twiddle any knob on your MIDI keyboard and it automatically assigns that knob to control that parameter. Only thing is, at the moment it's set to switch off after assign mode, and I prefer to disable that feature. So if we go File, Options, we can turn off switch off after assign mode. Also, while we're here, I reckon it's well worth putting it on high resolution mode. I do think it makes a difference to the sound, especially if we've got quite a complex sound with a lot of sort of high frequency overtones. I think high resolution mode does sound better. Okay, so now that we've turned off switch off after assign mode, if we hit the MIDI learn button again, we could hit another parameter like resonance 1, assign that. We could hit resonance 2, assign that. We could hit another control. We can do this as many times as we want, and it doesn't automatically turn off up here. We just need to remember to turn that off manually. But I think that's a lot better if you want to assign several parameters at once than having to kind of keep going back up and turning it on again. Over here on the left hand side, we've got the navigator that we can use to navigate between the various different pages. We've got the browser that has two main views. There's this folder tree view and there's also this database view. We're going to talk about this in a lot more detail in the very next video. We've got attributes. This is where we can select attributes to describe the sound of the synth patch we're working on to make it easier to find in the browser later on once we've saved it. We've got the master section here. There's various global parameters here. We can set the polyphony of the synth, and as I said, that is always displayed up there. Over here on the right hand side, we've got all the MIDI assignments. So those assignments we just made, the resonance, the cutoff, those are here in the list. And if we want to get rid of a MIDI assignment, we can just right click it and say remove, or indeed we can right click and reset the whole list. And you can load or save MIDI assignments and call those back up again when you want to. This is our effects page. This is where we can add effects to process our synths, and we can also process external audio signals if we want to. This is the arpeggiator. We're going to have a lot of fun with this later. This is the easy morph section. As I said, this is the XY morph pad, and that up there is the mini version of it. So moving one always moves the other. Basically, in this whole section here, we've got a lot of parameters that we can use to change the timbre and texture of our synth without having to radically alter things in expert mode. Expert mode itself has a number of different views. We've got our operators page here. We can see all our operators, A to F, also X, which is a noise generator and saturator, and Z, which is a filter. We've got our envelopes page, where we can see all the envelopes of our various operators. We've got a modulation matrix here that we can use to apply modulation to parameters from various sources like our LFOs or our pitch bend or our mod wheel. This is the key scale mode. Here we can use envelopes to change the amplitude of our operators depending on where on the keyboard they're played. So for example, you might want one of your operators to play lower in volume when you're higher up the keyboard. So that's what that does. We've got a spectrum analyzer, which can be quite handy for getting a bit of visual feedback to see how frequency modulation is changing our waveform. These buttons here, A to F and X and Z, they're for a bit more of a detailed look at our operators, and also X and Z, the noise generator and filter. And we've got our pitch section here where we've got a pitch envelope and we can assign modulation to the pitch. Over here on the right hand side is our FM matrix. This is where we decide what to route where and by how much. So as you can see, there's a lot going on in this synth, but if it looks a little bit scary and intimidating, don't worry, because we're going to look at every aspect of this synth in great detail over the course of these videos, and by the end of this series of tutorials, you are going to know how to use literally every parameter and every page you've just seen. So don't go away.